And welcome back, everybody, to the Podcaster Nation. That's right. I said welcome back because I know you were just listening to our stuff and you loved it so much that you came back for more. And I don't blame you. That was very, very sharp of you. That was a great move because we have a lot more for you. We have a wonderful guest here today. I've been talking to this lady for just a few minutes. I'm already completely enthralled in her and everything she is doing, all of her projects. She keeps trying to convince me she's retired. I'm not buying it. She does more than I do. Folks, this is the podcast that is about podcasters. It's for podcasters and it's done by podcasters. Our guest today is an awesome podcaster, very accomplished. You're going to learn a lot. This is the place where we come together to rise each other up. This is the place where we come together and the rising tide truly raises all ships. So let's get sailing and bring in our guest. Please welcome to the show the host of Story Power, the podcast, the host of the YouTube show, Classic Cinema with the Sage Sisters, which is, you guys got to check it out. It's awesome. She is the author of The Space Between Time and has another book coming out soon, which I hope we get to hear about. We'll see. And probably 50 other things that I just am not going to be able to get to because her list of accomplishments is longer than my arm. So please welcome to the show, Lucinda Sage-Midgorden. How you doing, Lucinda?
I'm really good today. Thank you. Thank you, Rory, for having me.
Well, that's wonderful, and thank you for being here today. Before we start talking about all of these fantastic projects you have going on, let me just kind of open it up with you. Tell all of our listeners, who is Lucinda? What are you about? What's your story, and what brings you here today?
Well, oh my goodness. Who am I? Well, I'm not even sure I know who I am yet. I'm still figuring that out, and I'm 72 years old. So, um, and that's a cool thing. I love growing and thinking and learning and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I wanted to start kind of back at the beginning, and this all leads to both Story Power and Classic Cinema with the Sage Sisters and everything else I've ever done practically. When I was a child, my parents instituted family movie night because, I mean, some parents read to their kids at night, but my dad had dyslexia, and even though he taught himself how to read, it was really difficult for him to read out loud. He stumbled over words. So he didn't read to us really very often. And my mom, this is back in, I was born in 53. So this is like late 50s, early 60s. My mom was a working mom. And she was working full time and she'd come home and fix dinner and she was tired at the end of the night. So she didn't have really time to read to us. Sometimes on the weekends she would. But we would watch family movie night, and it wasn't just, oh, wow, that was really great. It was, so here's the commercial. What did you think about what the characters were doing? Ah, what do you think's going to happen next? That kind of thing. So we were analyzing the movies. And I think this started when, oh, wow, when did Disney have their Sunday night? I don't even know when that started, their Sunday night family movie thing.
Yeah, I remember that.
Um, I was pretty young. I was pretty young when they started that. And so we would watch Disney movies at first when we were really young. But of course, network television had the version of HBO, Cinemax, all those, by having the special Sunday night movie or Saturday night movie.
Right.
And they'd play, fairly first run movies. But they also had movies that they played every single year, like The Wizard of Oz and Ben-Hur. And at Easter time, they would play um, some Easter movie like The Robe, or I don't know what they were. And the Ten
Ten
Commandments, and
Commandments, yeah.
Ten Commandments every year. And so we would of course watch those again because you always learn more when you revisit a story. Things that you didn't see before, things you didn't understand about why the characters did what they did. So, and that went on till I left at 18 and went to work and, did some stuff before I went off to college. And oh, I think I was in high school when I started to realize, Some of the things that I'm learning from some of those characters and the decisions they make, I'm starting to realize that, oh, they made this decision because of something that happened to them back in before the story started,
Mm.
some trauma that they had or something. And I was also learning how to read body language and facial expressions and listen to tone of voice. And were those things in sync with the words that they were using? Sometimes there was a disconnect. The words said one thing, the body language, facial expressions, tone of voice said something else. And so I started to realize I can use that in real life. When I'm having an encounter with somebody, I can be watching their body language and so on and so forth, and maybe see beneath the surface of what something else is going on with them. I think I was in high school when I started to figure that out. And I'm always thinking about stories. And so eventually, when I went to college, I was 24 when I went to college, and I went to the church sponsored college, which I no longer belong to that church, but it was a great learning experience because it was small, fairly small, and you got to know a lot of people. And my degree, my first degree was going to be in music, but I wasn't really very talented in that. I had a nice singing voice, but I couldn't read music very well. So, but the first semester I took introduction to religion, and just loved it because of all the myths and the Bible stories and all of that. I mean, I wasn't going to be a minister or anything. I just wanted to read the stories and hear the myths and how did this religion get started and how did that one get started, things like that. And then I did graduate with that degree, but 2 years in, I started getting involved in theater and the theater group. And I love that so much that I added it. I'm 6 years older than my husband, so he didn't come along until my second or third year. My third year is when he came. And we were in choir together, and we did a lot of stuff. We had a group of friends that we did stuff with, and I just thought he was so great, but he's too young, he's too young, he's too young. And finally, we had this like Hollywood kind of moment where we were getting ready for choir tour, and we were singing this love song that was going to be an encore thing. And we were goofing around singing it to each other. And then, oh, oops, something happened. But so then I added theater and speech because I had to wait for him to graduate, you know. So I have those degrees. And then when we moved to Portland, Oregon from Iowa, I had to, we had to find jobs, and his degree's in art. Well, it was difficult at first for him to find a job in art, and I definitely couldn't find a job that was going to pay a good salary in theater, even though Portland has a good theater program, lots of theater groups. At the time they did anyway. And but then I was working at a job that I just hated. It was paper pushing, what I call paper pushing. And I had this like meltdown finally because it was a toxic work environment. And so I signed up at Portland State and got my master's in theater, which later when we moved to Arizona, I got to use to teach. But I was involved in theater as a stage manager and an actor for a while, and I worked in the costume shop, and so I've done practically every job there is to do except for design um, in the theater. And so when we moved to Arizona, I got to teach it, and that was fantastic. So all of those, almost all my decisions had to do with theater, stories, that kind of thing. And at one point, I did have to teach English, which was kind of weird having a theater degree teaching English, but I had plenty of literature credits to do that. And as I was, going through menopause and driving an hour to go teach, getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and coming home at 4 or 5 o'clock at night and going to bed at 8 o'clock. And I was so tired all the time. And even if I was directing a play, I'd have to go on the weekends for the performances and so on and so forth. That's when I realized, oh, I know how to teach these kids how to write. So maybe I could be a writer. And so I quit teaching full-time high school and started teaching part-time college, and I got to teach theater classes. And then I was writing, and I started my blog and all that. And eventually I came to a story that I had started some time back. And that became the space between time. And I was very close to my father. He was like a very a mentor to me. And so that's sort of how the story had started, was a
Mm.
father-daughter mentor kind of thing. Now, of course, every author will tell you, you start off in one place and the story ends up someplace else,
Right.
which is what happened. But I, as I was teaching theater for about 14 years at Cochise College, I started listening to a podcast called What Should I Read Next with Anne Vogel. I don't know if you know that one. And I loved it because she's sort of like a book whisperer, she can hook you up with that you might really like to read. But it didn't say anything. Of course, it's all about books, but I wanted a podcast that talked about books, music, art, movies, television, all the various kinds of stories. And so, as this was before, I started thinking about it before the pandemic, but I started thinking I want to do a podcast that encompasses lots of different stories because I've learned so much from stories.
Hmm.
And and then when the pandemic hit and we were teaching, most of us at the college were teaching via Zoom, I said, "Oh, I know how to use Zoom, and I already knew how to use GarageBand. I think I might be able to do a podcast." So I was talking it over with my husband. He listens to lots of podcasts because he's also a techie, um, and a Mac geek. And so um, he's the one who helped me figure out how often did I want to publish it, and all the little technical things that you have to think of when you're creating a podcast. And he did my artwork for me. And so I decided to start it in the summer of 2022, or 20, it was July 22nd, 2020. I always remember that because it's one of my niece's birthdays. And I just, at first, I was talking to former students and my colleagues at the college and family members about stories that they loved and what did they learn from them. But eventually, about a year or so in, I was talking to these women, two of them, of the three women who started the Douglas Oral History Project. And they were talking about how they would bring people in from the community and just record them talking about their lives.
Hmm.
And
Okay.
that episode really kind of changed the trajectory of story power because I realized, every life is a library. And we are fascinated by other people's stories, even ordinary people's stories. Memoirs are really popular, and biographies and autobiographies are very popular. And it's because, ordinary people go through the same things we go through. And how did that person deal with that thing that happened to them, like losing a job, which is why I went to Douglas. I lost a teaching job that I thought was, where I was meant to be. But no, it was a
Yeah.
political thing and I got pushed out. So uh I, I thought, I need to be, I need to expand what I'm doing at Story Power. And right when I was starting to run out of ideas of how I could get guests, I was fortunate enough to be contacted by Podmatch. It's a what I call a dating service for
Yeah.
podcasters, and and you belong to it too.
You got it.
And it was right when they started. It was shortly after they started. So I joined, and man, I have met so many people from all over the world, and it has been just this wonderful. Uh, I love talking to people. I'm so curious. I want to know, oh, wow, tell me about your filmmaking career, or tell me about your producing career, or your artwork, or, whatever it happens to be. Or the music that you're creating. I have a couple of young women that I just met on vacation that I'm going to have on the podcast, and they write music and they're in a band and that kind of thing. So, so I haven't talked to a musician in a while, and so it's fun to talk to authors and read their books and talk to them about their books. And so, yeah, I don't know quite if it's going to change now that it's almost 5 years old, but. I still love it. I love doing every aspect of it. And even the parts that are, yeah, I have to go to Barry to, can you translate? I'll get the audio ready, but then he has to do something to it so I can upload it to Libsyn. And he helps me with technical stuff that go right over my head. I have no idea how to do them. But other than that, I just love doing it. And then that led to classic cinema with the Sage sisters because my sister and I, whenever we talk, we're always, oh, have you seen this show? Or did you watch this movie? And Turner Classic Movies happens to be one of our favorite channels. And so it took a while for us to kind of get it going. Well, I'm doing the technical stuff, but uh, to create the YouTube channel, and then we just pick one movie and analyze it, and I pick little clips and stills and stuff to put with it, and yeah, so practically everything that I do has to do with stories. And even recently, I've learned some things about stories that I hadn't really thought about before. Like, uh, I was just walking through the living room one day thinking about the MCU, and I thought, oh my gosh, that's a perfect. You're laughing, and I'm laughing too.
I
But
love
I
it.
have nieces and nephews who love it, and so Barry and I watch it. And I thought, I was thinking about emotional intelligence, and I went, click. Oh, there are two perfect examples of somebody who is definitely not emotionally intelligent and someone who's completely emotionally intelligent, and they're almost opposite each other. And a lot of times they clash, and that's uh, uh, um, Tony Stark is pretty much emotionally not very intelligent at the beginning, and Chris Evans' character, Captain America, is deeply emotionally intelligent, and that might be part of the reason why they clash so much. Uh, and I was like, oh, that's the perfect example. And I know it's funny,
Oh,
but
that's great.
uh, so I learned. Actually, I learned some emotional intelligence from all of my theater background and analyzing plays and analyzing the movies when we were kids, and also critical thinking, because I remember there were movies that sometimes I would, when I was a teenager, I'd come home from a game, because I was in pep club. I'd come home from a game and I'd watch a movie instead of going to bed right away, which, who goes when you're a teenager, who goes to bed when it's 10 o'clock at night? You go to bed when it's 1 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
So I'd come home and I'd watch a movie, and sometimes Dad would come out and watch with me, and we'd talk about the movie all weekend. And I remember this one movie, I had this question about this character. Why is this character doing this? And my dad said, well, it could be because this happened to them, or that happened to them, or this or that. And that's when I started really getting the whole idea of, oh, yeah, sometimes when people are yelling at you, it has nothing to do with you. It has something to do with some trigger that happened to them from when they were young, or maybe they got in a fight with their husband or their wife before they
Right.
came to work. And so I was able to start going, take a step back. Oh, take a breath. Um, and then I could say something like, okay, are you okay? It seems like you're really upset. What can I do to help you? Instead of, you know, yelling back. Now, I do yell back sometimes, but but yeah. So
Wow.
all of that comes from stories.
I love that. And I'm laughing with you. Please believe me, I'm a huge fan of the MCU. So when you said that, it
Hmm.
just came out of nowhere for me with the MCU, and I was like, oh my gosh, she likes Marvel comics too, on top of everything else.
Oh yeah.
Um, I've always loved stories and movies, especially, and they're like you with your dad. There's been a lot of instances in my life where they hold a very special place. So you're speaking to the choir with me. I'm sure there are a ton of listeners who are all going, "Oh my gosh, that's exactly how I feel about like this movie or that series or this character and that type of thing."
Hmm.
You've embraced this so much that I'm like a kid in a candy store right now. I just love hearing it because most people I think try to downplay that because they think maybe people are
Hmm.
going to be like, oh well, it's life's not a movie, and everybody likes
Right.
to show friends, but at some point you all have to go to work and get out of the coffee shop, right? But it doesn't change the fact that it's still one of those things that can change your life and change how you feel
Right.
about yourself and everything else. I love that you've embraced it that way. How have you been able to do that and
Well,
just say, hey, this is me. I just love stories, like that. That's so cool.
well, that was kind of a process too, because, you know, you're going to go into theater. How are you going to make a career out of that? Blah, the whole
Sure.
thing.
Yeah.
And then of course I did make a career out of it because I started teaching it. Um, and it wasn't that I didn't make money when I was acting and stage managing, but I was not a professional. I was only doing it semi-professionally. And I was teaching at Parks and Leisure and, little kids and homeschool kids and that kind of thing. But it wasn't a whole lot of money, you know. And I was driving all over the Portland metro area. I'd drive over to Vancouver and I was driving all over the Portland metro area to teach these classes and to be in these plays or stage manage the play. Stage managing, oh my gosh, that's such a hard job. But I don't remember how I did it. I really don't. Sometimes I think, how did I do that? Because it's so hard, especially if it's a musical. Uh but yeah, but I used to kind of feel like, oh, stories aren't as important as all the sciences and the math and all that. Well, when I started teaching and the whole push for STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math happened, I got kind of offended at that because the arts, and I said this to one of my podcast guests not too long ago, you don't learn emotional intelligence from math. You just can't.
Right.
And it's the arts and humanities where you learn the mistakes people made in history or in stories and then the consequences of those mistakes, and you learn about relationships, between countries or between people. And so we are emotional beings, and it's not bad to have the analytical you know disciplines, but we need, and it's obvious right now, we need to be paying attention to our emotional lives. It's so obvious the way the world is going.
Hmm.
And so I just think that we need to be emphasizing stories a whole lot more.
Sure. Now, on your podcast itself, Story Power, Tell everybody, what they should expect in an episode of that, because, you do definitely focus on the power of stories, but, it's different from episode to episode, I noticed, in terms of how it comes into play.
Oh, well, I am not one of those people. I'm not somebody who makes outlines for books.
Sure.
I kind of know where it's going to start and where it's going to end, but in the middle stuff, I don't pay attention to outlines. I've never liked outlines. And when I was teaching English, I used thinking maps as outline instead of outlines.
Hmm.
But yeah, so I just go and look at Podmatch. I have to hide my profile pretty often because I get so many requests to be on the show that I'm sometimes working a year ahead. And but I just look at the profiles of people and does their story sound interesting? In fact, one time I had a guest who's a certified financial planner kind of a guy. And he has his own business so that he doesn't have to do the whole, I got to sell you this insurance thing because no, he focuses on helping people with their retirement to make a retirement plan. And I thought, artists and theater people and people who work on movies and people, authors, they need financial planning help too. And this guy seemed like a really ethical guy. And so I had him on my podcast,
I love
which
it.
is, he's not in, I won't say he's not into stories, but, you know, it's somebody who can help the most of the people that I talk to. So,
I love that though, because you're constantly thinking about what's good for your audience.
yeah.
That's wonderful. I mean, not too few of us do that, I think. Sometimes we get so stuck in what we have to do, oh, it has to be this type of guest or it has to be this topic, that we lose the idea of who's listening to our show. And the reason
Hmm.
we have a show is to serve our listeners, in the end. So I
Hmm.
love that you have that attitude. I think it's cutting edge.
Well, I guess I sort of, every morning I wake up and I think, oh, what can I do today? What needs to be done today? Well, this little thing needs to be done and this little thing needs to be done, but I think I might want to go over here and work on this also. I kind of don't like to live by a schedule, even though I had to, of course, when I was working. And I was thinking as we were going up to Washington to our niece's graduation from the University of Washington that I'm so glad that I'm retired now and I don't have to think about the school year and smashing all this
Uh,
stuff into just 2 months of summer. And I don't have to think about that stuff anymore. I can just let it flow naturally and organically. So that's
that's
sort of how I
beautiful.
approach my podcast too.
Yeah. So you're basically just pursuing your own peace, and whatever comes along, type of thing.
Yeah.
I,
Hmm.
that's amazing. Congratulations and good for you. I think we all
Yep.
wish we could live that way. And
Yeah,
you're a little bit of a
really.
rebel,
Yeah,
aren't you?
I guess so. Because I was the only woman in my religious studies program. And there were people who didn't like that. It was a Christian college. Women can't be ministers. You need to change your major. If I was swearing person back then, I would have told them to F off. But, back then I didn't swear. And so I just was like, nah, you can't tell me what to do.
Yeah. I mean, you're like really nice about it, and you're like really sweet about it, but you're definitely, a little rebel going against the grain over here.
Oh, my sister Celeste she's a whistleblower. She's done it a couple of times.
Wow.
She even closed down it was where she worked, but it was a daycare center and they weren't doing things the way they should. And she reported them and they got closed down.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
so it sort of runs in the family. We got it from my dad.
I see. So the two of you ladies are not to be messed with. I get that. All right. I'm glad you brought up Celeste, because it lets us kind of segue into your YouTube program too. Your classic cinema with the Sage sisters. No, this is, two, I want to say quietly fiery individuals because I mean you're not abrasive in any way. You're both really sweet, but yeah, you've got something underneath that's just sort of a little bit of edge to you, which I love. And it's a neat thing that you're doing. Tell us about, and I know kind of where it came from with the classic cinema, but what do people expect when they go see that, when they go watch that on YouTube and they get to see an episode of this with you and your sister?
Well, the whole idea that well, I came up with it, and then I said I dragged Celeste into it because she's still working, so we have to record on the weekends. But we always talk about movies and not just talk about them and say, "Oh, it was really good." No, we analyze them like we learned from our parents. And so, but one of the things that we talk about is how many old classic movies, like from the 30s and 40s and 50s, you can still learn things from. And so far, we have chosen movies that have relevance for today. Like the very first one we did was Love with the Proper Stranger, and it's Natalie Wood and Steve McQueen, and they had a one night stand, and now she's pregnant, and what are they going to do? And it's in the 60s.
Wow.
No Roe v. Wade. So there's a scene where they have paid for a backroom abortion, but he, she, they just can't go through with it. He can't let somebody touch her and do things to her that might kill her.
Right.
And she can't go through with it either. I mean, it's in this really dirty building and, so we talked about that, because it was after Roe v. Wade got reversed. And how do people deal with those kinds of issues and how are they dealing with them now, again?
Hmm.
And then let's see, what are some of the other ones we talked about? The one that just aired today is the Philadelphia story. And we had two Cary Grant, Katharine Hepburn movies in one right after the other one. Bringing Up Baby was on the 11th of June, and today's is the Philadelphia story. And they are a, about, well, the Philadelphia story is about this rich family, and Katharine Hepburn's character was married to Cary Grant, and now they're divorced, and she's going to marry somebody else. And he's a working class guy. So it's the working class, you know, opposite the wealthy. And that's one of the themes about it. And Jimmy Stewart's in there too, and it's about the prejudices we have about whoever's not in our class,
Hmm.
basically, you know.
Right.
And so we do that kind of thing. And then what are some of the other ones? I can't even think. So we always try to pick something that's relevant for
Gotcha.
today.
Yeah, and there's an additional message to it that you're bringing out and comparing it to, and I mean that's awesome when you do that. Um, let me transition over just a little bit because you're very into the story time, the story power, the power of the story, and I know that's the podcast. The YouTube still focuses on classic movies. The book seemed to take a whole different tone for you, and maybe it has a different purpose. The space between time. Tell folks what that's about, what you wanted to accomplish there.
Yeah. I, well, I started this story way back when I was just substitute teaching when we first moved to Arizona. And it was about a father and a daughter. And I started the story and then I had to leave it alone because then I had some long-term sub assignments, which meant basically I was teaching full time. So I had to leave the story alone. Well, when I realized I always get these aha moments when I'm crossing the San Pedro River. I don't know why, but I got this aha moment one morning when I was driving to Douglas to teach English that I knew how to write and that I had this story that I had started and I kind of wanted to work on it. And what ended up happening was, see, I am an Oregon Trail descendant
Hmm.
on both sides of my family.
Wow. Okay.
So it ended up that it became a two timeline story. There's a woman in the present who has this horrible week. Her mother dies. Her fiance breaks off her engagement and she loses her job. And so she goes home. She works in Portland in the publishing industry. And she goes home to Roseburg, Oregon, which is in Southern Oregon, to her house that she now owns because her mother had it was all paid off, and to regroup. And she finds this old box that has never been unlocked, and inside are some journals. They're leather bound, they're wrapped in like whatever keeps them from getting wet. If they get wet, they're protected. And she sits down to start to read the first one. And she is the way I do time travel is her consciousness entered her three times great grandmother's consciousness.
Hmm.
And it started her timeline starts in 1859, which is the year that Oregon became a state. And it's the day of her father's funeral. So so Morgan in the past and Jenna in the present are experiencing very similar things because now orphans. Their other parent has died earlier on, and they've just their last parent.
Hmm.
And I guess my rebel side came out because Morgan had this controlling aunt who wanted her to come to Boston. She lived in Vermont. Wanted her to come to Boston and marry a rich man. Yeah. Well, she wasn't having any of that. She'd already been asked by one of her father's students. He was a minister and a theologian and wrote books about theology and taught. And he was in Oregon, and they needed a teacher in this southern town, which is now Jacksonville, but they had a different name for it in the beginning of the book. Uh, uh, and it happened to be the largest city in Oregon at the time due to gold rush. So she travels on the Oregon Trail, which I learned more about the Oregon Trail than I ever did in school, researching that. And so, periodically, Jenna will sit down and open the book and she'll enter her three times great grandmother's consciousness. And then she comes back, she learns something, comes back to her life. No time has passed in her time. And because she's dealing with this trauma of all these things that have happened, her mother dying and losing her job, which she is accused of stealing, embezzlement. She didn't do it, but she was framed for it. So she's got all these things she's dealing with, and it's that their journey together kind of because Morgan is aware that there's this presence with her. So yeah, that's sort of how that story goes. In the end, there are a lot of different things that happen. One of the characters in the past has to die, unfortunately.
Hmm.
But in the end, they both find a measure of happiness and healing. So the second book is a continuation of that. I'm only going to have two books in the series, and it's called Time's Echo. And when I started it, when I finished the first draft of The Space Between Time, it was 2014. I wanted Morgan in the past to get involved in the suffrage movement, but there wasn't anything for Jenna to do. So it just sat there. It just sat for a while. I mean, I was writing Morgan's story, but Jenna's timeline just sort of sat there, didn't have anything for her to do. And then in 2018 when Harvey Weinstein, I had decided that I was going to direct Measure for Measure, which is Shakespeare's Me Too kind of play. And And then the Harvey Weinstein thing happened about the same time, and I met this guy out of the blue who was a professional actor, and he was a Shakespeare expert. I had never directed a Shakespeare play before, so I don't know what I was thinking when I decided I wanted to do that. But I tend to sort of do that. Oh, this sounds like a good idea. I have no idea how to do it, but I'm going to do it anyway. So, so Dave helped me with it, and it turned out really great, but mostly because of him. But yeah, so then Jenna had something to do, and I had something to write for her. But as time has gone on and the up and down of everything that's going on in the world, and Jenna's timeline sort of has to do with what's going on in the world, I've had to stop and start and stop and start with her timeline. So now I'm to the point where I'm revising. I'm
Wow.
getting ready to be done to have
Okay.
it edited.
All right. Do we have an idea of when the second book's coming out?
No, you know me. I'm like,
Whenever it
oh,
comes
I'll
out.
work on my book today. No, I do really want to get it to my friend who is a ghostwriter and she's also writes her own books. She's agreed to read it and help me shape it.
Nice.
Because when you're writing things, you don't see there are mistakes or you don't see where it slows down or,
Right.
things
Hmm.
that slow the action down. You got to cut that stuff out.
Well, so what do you like the best out of what you're doing? Is it writing the book, writing the blog, doing the podcast, or being a YouTuber?
You know what? I don't know if people will understand this, but when I'm doing my book, I love it. When I'm doing the podcast, I love it. It's like time stand still. When Celeste and I start talking about a movie, we could talk for an hour and a half about a movie, and then I have to go back and edit it down. Um, but I love doing that. And if I get an idea for my blog post, I can sit down and write it to a certain, usually it's maybe 800 words or maybe 1,000 words. But I let it sit for a day or two and then I go back and edit it. And I've been doing that since 2013, so I'm getting pretty good at being able to write it and structure it in my head.
Nice.
I don't like outlines, me, I don't
Right.
like outlines. So, and now I do write blog posts for Prolific Writer's Life that I mentioned when you and I were talking before we started
Sure.
recording. I do that, and I have a film. We have a films for writers night once a month where we watch a film that has to do something with writing. And this Friday, our movie is American Fiction. We're talking about American fiction.
Nice.
And we talk about how, what can you learn from the writer's experience in the movie and, that kind of thing. So I do that. And then I also am going to start in July, as if I don't have enough to do, an event once a month for helping writers who want to promote their books
Hmm.
as podcast guests. How do I become a podcast guest? And what do I need to think about when I'm a podcast guest? So,
Nice. All right.
yeah,
I mean, why not? Because yeah, you don't have enough to do already. So,
right.
and that answer to that question actually makes sense because you really are just living in the moment and enjoying it to its fullest right now, which is beautiful.
Mhm.
So, I love the story. In the interest of time, let me get my corny question to you because it kind of plays with some of the stuff we're talking about right this second. Um, with the projects that you have going, what is the thing that you love the most about what it is you're doing? And what is it the thing that you just absolutely dislike the most about what it is you're doing?
The thing I love the most is just talking about stories or referring to stories or everything I do has to do with stories. And so that's the thing I love the most. I mean, I'm always thinking about story. I always have this stuff in the back of my head about stories, and oh my gosh, I never thought about that before. Like the MCU thing. I'm just
Hmm.
walking through my living room thinking about. Anyway, so stuff like aha moments come to me at random times. I love that. The thing that I'm not very good at is the whole, oh, and I won't say I don't like it, but it's sort of my brain doesn't really work this way, is how to promote. How do I
Mm,
promote all of this stuff?
sure.
So fortunately, Prolific Writers Life has a bunch of people who can help me with that. And my husband, is wanting to learn from those people too, because he's the one who kind of helps me maintain my website,
Right.
which really needs to be revamped. And he's the one who helps me learn. I need to learn AI a little bit, that kind of stuff. Uh, and so that all that stuff on the analytical side of my brain, I'm not always really so great at, except for when it comes to analyzing stories. But yeah, all
Gotcha.
that technical stuff, I'm not so good at that.
I
Although
understand.
I do know how to edit my movies. I use iMovie to edit, the YouTube. I know how to do that, and I know how to use GarageBand.
Nice.
But that's kind of the limit of my tech stuff.
Well, I love your story, and about what stories mean to you. I love that you're just, openly talking about how important this is in your life and how it impacts yourself. Because I think, like I said earlier, everybody is impacted by stories, by movies, by books,
Hmm.
and we downplay it so much because we don't want to, just admit out loud. I love that you're just admitting out loud. You're just saying, "Hey, this is me. This is, where my joy comes from," and you just live in that. And I honestly, it's inspiring to listen to you just talk about it. So, I mean, I love that you came on here today and just talked about that. So, thank you for that part of it. I got to tell you that right up front.
You're welcome.
As we, kind of pull this thing together and wrap it up, in terms of your, your podcast, the, story power, because we are talking to podcasters out there. But in terms of story power, you've been doing it a while, and you're very well established with it. So, as we kind of close things up, what is your best piece of advice to other podcasters? And we got a lot of them listening today who are just not quite where you are in their podcasting journey.
Mm. I think don't follow somebody else's idea of what your podcast should be. It should come from your heart, from your experiences, from you. You are in charge of your podcast. And that's partly why I don't pay attention to statistics or the algorithms that say, oh, you could get, because I get people coming to me, you could get a whole lot more listeners or viewers if you did this with your, and I'm like, yeah, maybe, but I don't, that doesn't, I don't care about that. That's not why I do my podcast or
Yeah.
my blog or classic cinema with the Sage sisters. I don't do it for that. I do it for something else. It's because it's inside me that wants to come out. And so that, I guess that's my biggest piece of advice is share the thing that you love most with the world. I think it's Marie Forleo who says that because share what means the most to you because you have something unique that the world needs. It's that I'm paraphrasing her, but that's the thing. Well, I mean, you've people out there have ideas and experiences that other people need to hear. So
Yeah.
tell your story.
Nice.
Tell your story.
Nice. And a little bit of rebel all the way to the very end there. I love that too. Don't listen to somebody else. Do what you know you need to do. That's great. Absolutely great. All right. Host of the Story Power podcast, the YouTube channel, Classic Cinema with the Sage Sisters, author of The Space Between Time, and the blog, Sage Woman Chronicles blog. Lucinda, thank you so much for being here today and for sharing everything that you did with everybody. You've been absolutely delightful, and I hope that you had as good a time as I did hearing your story.
Oh, yes, I did have fun. I did have fun. I love the artwork behind you too.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
Yeah,
It's all,
yeah,
specifically placed. So,
yes,
all right.
right.
Thank you very much for being on. Folks, this has been another fantastic episode of The Podcaster Nation, the show that is about podcasters. It's for podcasters and it's done by podcasters. This is the place where we come together to lift each other up. And folks, as we talked very much about today, this is the place where the rising tide truly raises all ships. So keep sailing.